Louisville Gray's fixed games baseball was still young in the 1870s, and people saw it as an honest sport played for pride more than money. But little did some fans know that not everyone saw it that way. The harsh reality of the sport would come to light in 1877, when the Louisville Grays did something no other team in baseball had done at the time. The team had a strong start that season in the National League, winning their first 27 games and looking like they were heading for a championship. Then suddenly, the wins stopped coming, and the team's performance fell apart. Fans noticed players making sloppy mistakes, missing routine plays, and looking like they were not even trying. Something was clearly off, but no one knew what it was. However, the truth came out when newspapers reported that gamblers were paying Louisville players to intentionally lose games. 4 men were caught in the middle of the scheme. Bill Craver, who was the team's captain, Jim Devlin, their ace pitcher, George Hall, a star outfielder, and Al Nichols, who played infield, were all accused of throwing games. Devlin was especially damaging because he pitched nearly every inning for the team. If he gave up runs on purpose, there was almost no way for the Grays to win. On October 19, 1877, team president Charles Chase presented the league with letters and testimony proving the players had taken money from gamblers to fix games. The league's response was swift and harsh. All 4 men were banned from professional baseball for life. It was the very first major gambling scandal in the sport, and it sent shockwaves through fans who had thought baseball was pure. The scandal destroyed the Louisville franchise, which folded soon afterward. For the league, it was an embarrassing moment because it showed how vulnerable the game was to corruption. Even in its earliest years, money and gambling had found a way to creep into baseball. That stain never really went away, and it set the stage for even bigger scandals in the future. Black Sox fixed World Series games. When you think about baseball scandals, none is bigger than the 1919 World Series. The Chicago White Sox were stacked with talent that year, featuring stars like shoeless Joe Jackson, Eddie Cicotte, and Buck Weaver. They were heavy favorites against the Cincinnati Reds. But instead of playing to win, 8 White Sox players made a secret deal with gamblers to throw the series. It became one of the darkest chapters in sports history. Game 1 of the series was played on October 1, 1919, at Redland Field in Cincinnati, and fans quickly noticed something was strange. Eddie Cicotte, who was usually dominant, hit the very first batter of the game, signaling to gamblers that the fix was on. The White Sox went on to lose that game 9-1, and over the course of the best-of-9 series, suspicious plays piled up. Balls were dropped, throws went wild, and pitchers served up fat pitches that Reds hitters smashed with ease. The Reds won the series 5-3, and fans who had bet on Chicago felt betrayed. Afterward, rumors of the fix swirled around the league. Sports writers like Hugh Fullerton and former player Christy Mathewson pointed out the strange plays. In 1920, a grand jury in Chicago formally investigated, and several players confessed to taking bribes from gamblers, including Cicotte and shoeless Joe Jackson, though Jackson later claimed he tried his best on the field. Even though the players were acquitted in court in 1921, Commissioner Kennesaw Mountain Landis banned all 8 from baseball for life. This included Jackson, whose .375 batting average in the series remains one of the most debated stats in history. The Black Sox scandal almost destroyed baseball's credibility, and to this day, fans argue about whether Jackson deserved his punishment. The scandal forced baseball to clean up its image and made gambling a lifelong taboo in the sport. It showed the league just how much damage corruption could do, not just to players, but to the trust of every fan watching. Simply put, if there was any game the MLB wants you to forget, it's Game 1 of the 1919 World Series, as it set the tone for more darkness in the sport. Rigged Cubs games in 1918 World Series. The 1918 World Series is remembered for being played during World War I, but it's also surrounded by whispers of a fix. The Chicago Cubs faced the Boston Red Sox, led by a young Babe Ruth, and lost the series 4-2. On paper, the Red Sox were good, but the Cubs were considered the stronger team. That's why so many people thought something wasn't right when Chicago's players started making bizarre mistakes. One of the biggest moments came in Game 6 on September 11, 1918. And trust me when I say, the MLB wants you to completely forget this one. On this day, Cubs outfielder Max Flack made 2 costly errors in the same inning, which helped Boston score the winning runs. In fact, His plays looked so sloppy that fans accused him of purposely throwing the game. Other Cubs players also underperformed, including their pitchers, who suddenly couldn't find the strike zone. Rumors spread that gamblers had bribed Cubs players to lose, and while it was never officially proven, many historians believe that players did accept money to throw parts of the series. It was almost like a rehearsal for the Black Sox scandal that came 1 year later. The timing also looked suspicious because baseball was struggling financially during the war, and low attendance at games made people desperate for betting money. Of course, Babe Ruth dominated the series for Boston, pitching a shutout in Game 1 and driving in key runs. The Red Sox walked away as champions, but the controversy over how Chicago played never went away. The alleged fix hurt the reputation of the Cubs for years, and people who followed the sport felt like baseball had a gambling problem that nobody wanted to admit. The 1918 World Series didn't get the same attention as the Black Sox scandal, but many believe it was just as shady. It added to the growing fear that the sport wasn't as clean as people wanted it to be. Disco Demolition Night Riot Baseball has seen wild promotions, but none backfired like Disco Demolition Night on July 12, 1979. The Chicago White Sox were playing a doubleheader against the Detroit Tigers at Comiskey Park. Radio DJ Steve Dahl had organized the stunt, which invited fans to bring disco records to the stadium. Between games, the records would be blown up on the field. It sounded like a wild but harmless idea at first. The event drew more than 50,000 fans, many of them young people who hated disco and loved the idea of watching it get destroyed. The promotion promised cheap tickets, and thousands of extra fans showed up outside the stadium, forcing their way in without paying. By the time the first game ended, the atmosphere was already tense, with fireworks and bottles flying around. During the break, a huge box of disco records was placed in center field. Dahl came out, gave a speech mocking disco music, and then set off an explosion that blew vinyl pieces everywhere. That's when things spiraled out of control. Thousands of fans stormed the field, tearing up the grass, climbing the foul poles, and starting fires. Players had to run for safety while riot police rushed in. The scene turned into chaos, and the second game of the doubleheader never happened. The umpires ruled the field unplayable, and the White Sox were forced to forfeit to the Tigers. Instead of being remembered as a fun baseball promotion, it became one of the league's most embarrassing nights. The riot embarrassed the White Sox and the league because it showed how little control they had over their own stadium. What was meant to be a funny stunt turned into a full-scale riot broadcast on national television. For many, it was a reminder that baseball sometimes cared more about gimmicks than the game itself. 10-cent beer night riot. June 4th, 1974, is one of those days Major League Baseball probably wishes it could erase from history. On that night, the Cleveland Indians came up with a promotion they thought would boost ticket sales. They planned to sell 10-cent beer night at Cleveland Stadium. Yes, you heard that right. Fans could get as much beer as they wanted for just 10 cents a cup. Now, on paper, it looked like a marketing win, but in reality, it was a recipe for complete disaster. The Indians were playing the Texas Rangers, and there was already bad blood between the two teams. Just a week earlier, they had a bench-clearing brawl in Texas, so when the Rangers came to Cleveland, tensions were high. Before the first pitch was even thrown, add unlimited cheap beer to the mix, and you had chaos waiting to explode. As the night went on, the crowd became more and more rowdy. Fans were sneaking beer, fighting, and even streaking across the field. By the ninth inning, things got completely out of control. Dozens of drunk fans stormed the field carrying chairs, bats, and bottles. One fan struck Indians pitcher Tom Hilgendorf in the head with a chair, while others rushed at Rangers players. Cleveland manager Ken Aspermonte had to pull his team off the field for their own safety. The umpires eventually declared the game a forfeit, giving the Rangers a 9-0 win. Police had to restore order, but by then, the damage to baseball's image was already done. Newspapers across the country mocked MLB for allowing such a reckless promotion, and it became a black eye on the league's reputation. 10-cent beer night went down not just as a failed idea, but as one of the most embarrassing nights in MLB history. Don Denkinger's diabolical call. If you want to talk about a single call that changed the course of a championship, you can't skip Game 6 of the 1985 World Series. On October 26th, the St. Louis Cardinals faced the Kansas City Royals. The Cardinals were leading the series 3-2, so one more win would crown them champions. They were up 1-0 in the ninth inning when Jorge Orta of the Royals came up to bat. He hit a ground ball to first baseman Jack Clark, who tossed it to pitcher Todd Worrell covering first. Orta was out by at least a step. Everyone saw it. Well, except first base umpire Don Denkinger. Denkinger called Orta safe, and Royals fans erupted in cheers, while the Cardinals stood in shock. Replay after replay showed the mistake, but back then, MLB didn't allow video review. Unfortunately, that one call completely shifted the momentum. The Royals took advantage, scored 2 runs in that inning, and won the game 2-1. Game 7 the very next night was a blowout, with Kansas City crushing St. Louis 11-0 to win the World Series. But to this day, many argue that the championship was stolen from the Cardinals. Denkinger later admitted the call was wrong, but the damage was already done. The fallout was ugly. Cardinals fans sent Denkinger death threats, hate mail, and even vandalized his property. He even had to live under constant protection for weeks. The call also became one of the strongest arguments for bringing instant replay into baseball. It took decades, but eventually MLB introduced replay review, and Denkinger's infamous mistake is often cited as a key reason why. That one missed call didn't just change a game, it changed a championship, and it left a permanent scar on MLB's credibility. Armando Galarraga's perfect game robbed. On June 2, 2010, Detroit Tigers pitcher Armando Galarraga was on the brink of baseball immortality. Facing the Cleveland Indians, he retired 26 straight batters and was just 1 out away from a perfect game. This is something only 20 pitchers in MLB history had ever achieved up to that point. The crowd at Comerica Park was on its feet as every pitch drew him closer to making history. Now, with 2 outs in the 9th, Jason Donald of the Indians hit a slow grounder to first baseman Miguel Cabrera, who fielded it cleanly and tossed it to Galarraga covering first. Donald was clearly out by half a step, and the Tigers began to celebrate. Then something shocking happened. First base umpire Jim Joyce stretched his arms wide and called Donald safe. The stadium erupted in disbelief. Fans booed, Tigers players protested, and replays instantly showed Joyce had blown the call. Galarraga, incredibly, smiled and stayed calm, even finishing the game by getting the next batter out. But everyone knew history had been stolen. Instead of joining the record books, Galarraga was left with a 1-hit shutout and a lifetime of what-ifs. After the game, Joyce watched the replay and admitted through tears that he had made the wrong call. He even went to the Tigers clubhouse to personally apologize to Galarraga. The pitcher, showing amazing class, forgave him publicly, saying, "Nobody's perfect." Still, the incident reignited debates about instant replay in baseball. Fans and players argued that MLB needed to expand video review to prevent such mistakes from ruining the game's most historic moments. Interestingly, Commissioner Bud Selig refused to overturn the call, saying he didn't want to rewrite history. Galarraga's near-perfect game is remembered as both one of baseball's greatest tragedies and one of its most human moments. It showed the heartbreak of human error, but also the grace of sportsmanship. Sam Holbrook. Infield fly rule. Chaos. The first ever National League wildcard game on October 5, 2012, between the St. Louis Cardinals and the Atlanta Braves was supposed to be exciting. Instead, it turned into one of the ugliest scenes in recent playoff history, thanks to a controversial umpiring decision. In the bottom of the 8th inning, the Braves trailed 6-3, but had runners on first and second with just 1 out. Shortstop Andrelton Simmons popped up a ball into shallow left field. Cardinals shortstop Pete Kozma drifted back, then suddenly pulled away at the last second. The ball dropped, safely between him and left fielder Matt Holliday, and it looked like the Braves had bases loaded with a chance to rally. But umpire Sam Holbrook stunned everyone by calling the infield fly rule, which is an obscure rule meant to prevent fielders from intentionally dropping easy pop-ups. But the problem was, this ball wasn't near the infield. It landed about 225 feet from home plate in the outfield grass. Braves players and fans were furious. Instead of bases loaded, Simmons was out, and the Braves' rally fizzled. What happened next made it even worse. Angry Atlanta fans began throwing trash, beer cans, and bottles onto the field, forcing a 19-minute delay as umpires and grounds crew tried to restore order. The Braves officially protested the game, but MLB upheld the call. The Cardinals went on to win 6-3, ending Atlanta's season. For years after, Fans and analysts debated whether Holbrook's call was technically correct or just a bad judgment. Either way, the optics were terrible. On national TV, fans saw chaos, garbage raining down from the stands, and a playoff game decided not by players, but by an umpire's interpretation of a little-known rule. The infield fly game became another example of how controversial calls can overshadow the sport itself, leaving fans bitter and the league embarrassed.
Astros sign-stealing games. Few scandals in baseball history rocked the sport quite like the Houston Astros sign-stealing scheme during the 2017 season. On the surface, it looked like an incredible story, as the Astros went from being one of the league's worst teams just a few years earlier to winning their first ever World Series championship by beating the Los Angeles Dodgers in 7 games. But 2 years later, in November 2019, The Athletic broke a bombshell report that revealed how the team had bent, and in many people's eyes, completely broken the rules. The scheme worked like this. The Astros installed a camera in center field at Minute Maid Park that fed live video to a monitor in the clubhouse tunnel. From there, players and staff decoded opposing catchers' signs in real time. To alert the batter, someone would bang on a trash can with a bat, signaling what type of pitch was coming. It was crude, but it worked. Once the report came out, MLB launched an investigation and confirmed the cheating, and the fallout was massive. General manager Jeff Luhnow and manager A.J. Hinch were suspended for a year and then fired by the team. To add to that, the Astros were fined $5 million, which was the maximum allowed. They also lost 4 draft picks. But here's the part that enraged fans the most. The players were not punished, and the 2017 World Series title was not stripped. To this day, opponents call the Astros championship tainted, and visiting crowds still boo Houston players mercilessly. For many, the scandal wasn't just about cheating, it was about MLB's weak response. Fans felt like the league protected its own success story instead of protecting the integrity of the game. Catcher's interference. In 1975 World Series, Game 3 of the 1975 World Series between the Cincinnati Reds and Boston Red Sox remains one of the most controversial games in Fall Classic history. Played on October 14th at Riverfront Stadium, the matchup was tied in the 10th inning, when one bizarre play left Red Sox fans fuming for decades. Ed Armbrister of the Reds came up to bunt. He popped the ball up, and as it came down, he collided with Boston catcher Carlton Fisk while Fisk tried to field it. Fisk argued he was blocked from making the play and demanded interference. In almost any other situation, fans would expect the batter to be called out, but home plate umpire Larry Barnett ruled the collision incidental contact, meaning it wasn't interference. That no call changed everything. Fisk had no chance to throw to second base, allowing the Reds' Cesar Geronimo to advance safely. Moments later, Joe Morgan drove in the winning run, giving Cincinnati a 6-5 victory and a 2-1 series lead. The Red Sox would go on to win the legendary Game 6 thanks to Fisk's iconic walk-off home run, but the controversy from Game 3 still hung over the series. Boston fans were furious. They argued that the Reds were handed an advantage in a pivotal game. Fisk himself never fully let it go, insisting years later that the interference cost his team a chance at a championship. The incident became one of the most debated umpiring calls in postseason history. Even today, when people look back on the 1975 World Series, often called one of the greatest ever, this moment still sticks out. To Red Sox fans, it was proof that one missed call could change the outcome of a game, a series, and maybe even history itself. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more Inside MLB stories. Now go check out our next video.